welcome back. Today we're going to start solving equations by factoring. So I have some notes here on the board. We'll talk our way through them. There'll be a couple more shots of the board because I'll need more notes, but here we go. So for starters, well, you can't read my title. 5.7, solving by factoring. So we have some steps here, and I'm going to leave those there for all of the examples that we do because they're what we really need to pay attention to. The first thing we need is to get 0. Okay, so we'll talk about that here in just a second. Then we're going to factor, we're going to split it up, and then finally we're going to solve. And so here's what I mean. Here is a problem that we have. I have 9x squared minus 18x is equal to 0. So when I say get 0, what I mean is one side of your equation needs to be 0. If you don't have 0, you have to either add or subtract so that one side is completely cleared out and you have 0. So I already have 0, so I don't have to worry about step 1. So it's already taken care of, which means I'm on to step 2. I need to factor now. And so what I'm going to do here, I notice that I have a common factor, and it's 9x. So if I divide both parts by 9x, remember our common factor goes in front. So here, I'll show us what's going on. We have that common factor. We're going to divide both pieces by 9x. And remember, it tucks out front. And when we do the division, for the first part, we just get x, and 18 divided by 9 is 2, so we have minus 2. All right, so we have it factored. And so this is where we're going to take advantage of something, and you can find it in your book. It's called the zero factor property. But basically, the zero factor property just says the only way you get 0 if you're multiplying stuff together is if one of those pieces is 0. So since we have two pieces in this case that are multiplied together to be 0, the 9x and the x minus 2, something has to be 0. That's the only way this happens. Well, it happens if 9x by itself is 0. So we take, this is the split step that I have written down over here. We're going to split it up. We're going to split it up. So I have the 9x, and I'm going to set it equal to 0, and then I'm going to take the x minus 2 and set it equal to 0. So for the first one, I divide both sides by 9, and I get a solution of x is equal to 0. For the other one, since it's x minus 2, I add 2 to both sides, and I get x equals 2. And we have two solutions, and that's exactly what we would expect to see. All right, so let's do another example. But first, I stop this. Okay, for our second example, we have 9x squared is equal to 25. Now, what you hopefully notice is we don't have 0. So I want to have 0. I'm going to subtract 25 from both sides just so I can get one side emptied out. Now I have 0, right? That's our first step. Get 0. So now I have to factor this. I recognize this as a difference of squares, right? 9 is 3 to the second power, and 25 is 5 to the second power. So my A is 3x, and my B is 5. Means this factors to be 3x plus 5 times 3x minus 5, and this whole thing is still equal to 0. Okay? So now we have it factored, which means we can move on to splitting it. Right? Remember, the whole point here is when we get it factored, those pieces can be split apart and set equal to 0 by themselves. So we have 3x plus 5 is equal to 0. We have 3x minus 5 is equal to 0. And now we just solve those separately, right? Little tiny problems to solve. So I subtract 5 here on the left and get 3x is equal to negative 5. Divide by 3, and I'm running out of room, but we get x is a negative 5/3. Go ahead and leave that as a fraction. Okay, that's a really nasty looking decimal. Do the same thing over here. We add 5 to both sides. We get 3x is equal to 5, and x is equal to 5/3. And there we go. That's everything we need for this one. All right, so we have one more example here that I want to go through. This one's big and complicated, so hopefully we can see that okay. I think you probably can. Sure hope so. Anyway, you'll notice we don't have 0, so we're going to have to do that. But this problem has an added little bit of not fun. Okay, we have this x plus 1 here, and that's really kind of problematic. It's being squared, so we need to get rid of that. square if we can. So what I did is I multiplied this x plus 1 squared out. Now I didn't put it on the board because I ran out of room, but remember it's just x plus 1 times x plus 1, and that's the whole thing. Multiply it out and you get x squared plus 2x plus 1. So then I had two of these x squared terms. I combined them and made 2x squared. And now I had to get 0. Okay, so again, I'm trying to save a little space here on my teeny little board. So I subtracted 25, and so 1, and if I subtract 25 from it, 1 minus 25 gives me this negative 24 I have over here. So now I have 0. Everything is, I don't have the parentheses anymore, so now I have 0, and I'm ready to go. All right, so now I'm going to factor. First thing I notice is that 2, 2, and negative 24, those are all divisible by 2. So I divide them all by 2, and I set that greatest common factor out front. So now I have 2 times x squared plus x minus 12. This is a trinomial. I know that positive 4 and negative 3 will multiply to be negative 12 and add up to the one that's in the middle. So I'm kind of going through the factoring a little quick here because we have other videos for those, but hopefully you can see that. And so we get x plus 4 and x minus 3. Notice I still have my common factor there, right? I still have the 2. And now I'm ready to split it up. And I want to point something out here. We have 3 pieces this time, right? We have the 2, the x plus 4, and the x minus 3. So when I pull it apart, I have 3 different parts. 2, x plus 4, and x minus 3. But 2 can't be 0. That's impossible. Doesn't work. Never going to happen. So that one doesn't count. For x plus 4, I subtract 4 from both sides and get negative 4. For x minus 3, I add 3 to both sides and get positive 3. And there you go. There's a few examples. Hopefully this gets you going. But basically this section all comes down to, can you factor? If you can factor, you can do this. This is really, really straightforward if you can factor. If you can't, it's going to be really tricky. So if you're having trouble factoring, go back and look at the other sections and make sure you get the factoring figured out. All right, thanks.